In the scorching savanna of a small village nestled between the majestic hills of Masai Mara, a chilling scream pierced the evening air, sending shivers down the spines of the residents as they rushed to the scene to find Akua, the beautiful and young wife of the village elder, lying lifeless on the ground, her body cold, her eyes frozen in a permanent stare, and a look of terror etched on her face, a sight that would haunt the villagers for a long time. And as the news spread like wildfire, the village was thrown into a state of panic, with some running to fetch the village elder, while others stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. The usually calm and peaceful village was now gripped with fear and anxiety, as the people struggled to make sense of the brutal murder that had taken place in their midst. And as the village elder, Kofi, arrived at the scene, he was met with a sea of tear-stained faces, and his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for answers, but all he saw were the same questions reflected back at him, a mixture of grief and confusion. And as he knelt beside Akua's lifeless body, he let out a heart-wrenching cry that echoed across the savannah, a cry that was not just a lamentation of his loss, but a cry for justice, for the perpetrator to be brought to book. And as the villagers watched, they knew that their lives would never be the same again. The fabric of their community had been torn apart, and it would take a lot of effort to mend it. The village was in a state of mourning, but it was also on the cusp of a journey of discovery, a journey that would uncover secrets, lies, and betrayals that had been hidden beneath the surface for a long time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, the atmosphere was heavy with grief, but also with a sense of anticipation. As the people waited with bated breath to see what would unfold next, the village was on the threshold of a storm that would test their resolve, their strength, and their sense of justice. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the villagers gathered around Kofi, who was still kneeling beside Akua's body, and they listened in rapt attention as he began to recount the events of the past, the story of how Akua had come into his life, and how she had become an integral part of the village, a story that would reveal the deep-seated emotions, the passions, and the conflicts that had been simmering beneath the surface. And as Kofi spoke, his words painted a vivid picture of a young girl who had grown into a beautiful woman with a kind heart and a generous spirit. A woman who had captured the hearts of everyone in the village with her charm and her beauty, but also with her kindness and her compassion. And as the night wore on, the story unfolded, revealing a complex web of relationships, of alliances, and of rivalries that had been building up over time. A web that had been spun with threads of love and hatred, of loyalty and betrayal. And as the villagers listened, they began to see the events of the past few days in a new light. They saw how Akua's murder was not just a random act of violence, but a culmination of a series of events that had been set in motion a long time ago. And as the story reached its climax, the villagers were left with a sense of shock and a sense of awe as they realized that the truth was not what they had expected, that the perpetrator was not who they had thought, and that the motives were not what they had assumed. And as the truth sank in, the villagers were faced with a difficult reality, a reality that required them to confront their own biases, their own prejudices, and their own complicity in the events that had unfolded. And as they grappled with this reality, they knew that they had a long journey ahead of them, a journey of healing, of reconciliation, and of redemption, a journey that would require them to confront their own demons and to make amends for their past mistakes. And as the night wore on, the villagers dispersed, each carrying with them a newfound understanding of the events that had transpired, and a determination to rebuild their community stronger and more resilient than before. And as they walked away from the scene, they knew that they would never forget Akua and the impact she had had on their lives, and they vowed to ensure that her memory lived on as a reminder of the power of love and the destructive nature of hatred. And as the days turned into weeks, the village began to heal, the wounds began to close, and the people began to rebuild their lives. But the memory of Akua remained, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of living each day with kindness, compassion, and empathy. And as the village elder, Kofi, looked out at the thriving community, he knew that Akua's spirit lived on in the hearts of the people, and that her legacy would continue to inspire them, to guide them, and to remind them of the importance of living in harmony with one another. And as the sun rose over the Masai Mara hills, casting a golden glow over the village, the people knew that they had been given a second chance, a chance to create a better future, a future that was built on the principles of justice, equality, and compassion, and they vowed to make the most of it, to live each day with purpose, and to never forget the lessons of the past. And so the story of Akua came to an end, but the impact of her life and her death would live on, a reminder to the villagers of the importance of living in harmony with one another, and of the need to always strive for justice, equality, and compassion. And as the villagers looked up at the stars, they knew that Akua was watching over them, guiding them, and inspiring them to be better versions of themselves. And they smiled, knowing that they would always carry her memory with them, and that her spirit would continue to be a source of strength and inspiration for generations to come. And the village continued to thrive, a testament to the power of the human spirit and the ability of people to come together to heal and to rebuild in the face of adversity. And as the years went by, the story of Akua became a legend that was passed down from generation to generation, a reminder of the importance of living with kindness, compassion, and empathy, and of the need to always strive for justice, equality, and redemption. And the villagers never forgot the lessons they had learned from Akua's story, and they lived their lives accordingly, building a community that was strong, resilient, and just, a community that was a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and unforgiving. And so the legacy of Akua lived on, a legacy that would continue to inspire, to guide, and to remind the villagers of the importance of living in harmony with one another and with the natural world. And as the sun set over the Masai Mara hills, the villagers knew that they would always be grateful for the time they had with Akua, and that they would never forget the impact she had had on their lives.